Hi everyone, welcome to another video. This is my granny's old kitchen table, which I've had for about 10-12 years now. Absolutely love it, don't want to get rid of it, but it's just too small for our daily use. So what I thought I'd do is create a self-supporting extendable top that can go on this table. And being self-supporting, I'm not screwing into or damaging in any way the existing table, so that in the future I can put this tabletop back on should I need to do so. So in today's video I'm going to show you how I went about doing that. So the first step was to remove the old tabletop, which was fixed pretty crudely to the frame below with a series of screws. Okay, so the plan was, as I've just shown, to construct 4 exterior ply leaves which would be self-supported by 2 struts running the length of the table. Supports are screwed to the underside of the tabletop itself, not the table, using M6 joint connector bolts and screw-in sleeves. But I also wanted to be able to take a sleeve off to make the table slightly smaller as well. So to do this, we can remove the supports. In this configuration, the table base itself is large enough to support the leaves. So the first step was to decide what I was going to make the actual kitchen tabletop from. I decided to go for 25mm exterior ply. These are actually the offcuts from the tabletop itself. I decided to go with exterior ply because I just feel that, having worked with MDF on tabletops like this before, the exterior ply is a lot more stable. It has 2 good sides, unlike shuttering ply that only has the one. And as each leaf of the table was going to be 1400mm by 500mm, I realised that I'd need 2 sheets to get my 4 leaves, but then crucially I could use this full length piece at the bottom to divide into half to make the supports that would sit underneath the kitchen top and support it. Exterior ply thickness is like 25mm, it's quite a specialist product, so you probably wouldn't find this in your typical B&Q. You'd have to go to your local timber merchants, as I did, to pick up this product. I then pre-drilled each one of these strips so that they could then be glued and screwed together to create 2 incredibly strong 50mm wide by 60mm deep supporting beams. With that done, I could then lay the base of the table down on the underside of the new leaves and start marking out the position of the supporting beams themselves, and also, as you can see here, the positioning of the zip bolts that I was going to use to clamp the leaves tightly together. I've never used zip bolts before, but they're used a lot to join kitchen worktops together, and so I thought they'd be the perfect bit of hardware for me to use in this situation. You can buy them at Ironmongery direct, as I bought mine, full details of which will be available in the description at the end of this video. This datasheet on their website gives me the precise depth and length of the channel that I needed to cut, which enabled me to then mark it out and get my router ready. Now, if you're a kitchen fitter, the chances are you'd have one of these professional worktop jigs, which is like a guide for your router. But for me, as this is a one-off, I just use my little router set here, specifically the straight cutter that you see here, to cut the shaft between the 2 ends of the bolt. For the circular rebates, I used a 25mm wood drill bit, putting a bit of duct tape on the drill, as you can see here, to crudely set the depth that I needed to drill the hole to. Because the zip bolts were nice and close to the edge of the tabletop, I was able to use the fence on the side of the router to steady the router as it cut the hole for the zip bolt shafts. That way I got a nice straight cut. To make sure each leaf sat perfectly flat against the next one, I decided to use biscuit joints spaced equally across the width of the leaf itself. I don't have a dedicated biscuit jointer, so I use these biscuit joint cutters on my router to cut the grooves in the side of the kitchen table, as you can see here. To round off the edge of the table, I'm just using a kitchen cup. I started by trying to use my jigsaw to cut around the curve that you've just seen me draw, and it wasn't at all effective because the blade of the jigsaw was bending away as I tried to take it round the curve. So I decided then it was much easier to use my floorboard saw and then to finish off rounding off the corner with my Bosch belt sander. I decided to route a decorative finish around the top edge of the table using this rounding over bit. Unfortunately, exterior ply isn't the best quality and there are imperfections in the wood, particularly in between the grains, so I did have to fill a few little imperfections like this as I went along. So the reasonably straightforward job of gluing in the biscuits, which I'm obviously only putting glue on one side, it goes without saying that the biscuits need to be on the same side of each leaf, because to interchange the leaves, if they were on different sides, we wouldn't be able to do that. To make it easy to locate the new tabletop on the base itself, I inserted these side guides on the underside of the new tabletop. I painted the tabletop with a couple of coats of Joncryl Waterbased Primer Undercoat from Johnstones, a couple of coats of Farrow Skimming Stone Estate Eggshell. But even after painting it with all these paints, you still need a varnish or a lacquer to protect the top coat from things like red wine, which will otherwise stain straight through. So I put a couple of coats of the Colron interior lacquer on top of the eggshell, just as a precaution. I thought it'd provide a nice touch to put a decorative edge on the support beams, so you see me here drawing the sort of shape that I wanted to follow, and then using the floorboard saw to roughly cut around the shape. It can be quite hard work sawing thick pieces of timber with a floorboard saw, so you see here I've just got my universal Irwin Jack saw out just to finish the job. And then it was back to my trusty Bosch belt sander, which must be all of about 15-20 years old, to put the curves onto the end of the support beams. You can see here the sander belt was actually coming out slightly there. It needed a bit of fine tuning. That's better. Just shows you this process that you don't need a professional workshop to achieve a really lovely finish on things like this. Now it's just a question of taking off the rough edges with some 120 grade sandpaper. So with everything in place, all the parts of the leaves cut and ready for assembly, it was just a question of lining all the leaves up, tightening the zip-lock bolts, as you can see we're doing here, so that the leaves of the table were in the perfect position to add the supporting beams in order that we can drill the holes for the M6 joint connector bolts and the screw-in sleeves which need to be inserted into the underside of the tabletop itself. Clearly I'm being a little bit brave here, drilling through wood with the carpet below, so please don't do this at home. So quick reminder, these are the M6 joint connector bolts and the screw-in sleeves that I bought from Ironmongery Direct. Again, details of everything I've used today will be in the description at the end of this video. Again, I haven't used screw-in sleeves for this sort of application before, but they're a really good bit of hardware for something like this, where you're going to be wanting to potentially tighten up and release these bolts on a reasonably regular basis as you make your table larger or smaller, something you wouldn't want to be doing just by screwing into the wood itself. I don't want to go too far into the wood, so I'm setting a guide, just a crude one, with a piece of duct tape. You can get far more effective guides in the form of these metal collars that you fit onto the drill, but unfortunately I've lost all mine. So DIY techniques will suffice. With the screw-in sleeves in position, it was time to finally start putting the tabletop together. In hindsight, I think the number of M6 bolts I used was overkill, but I just wasn't sure how many bolts I would need to fix in place for the two central sleeves to take the weights of the two outer sleeves. You can see here just how incredibly easy it is to install the zip bolts and just how effective they are. At some point I need to paint the underside of the table and the supporting beams, but I put the table together over a few days in a bit of a rush because we were having some friends over, so it wasn't a priority. But it is something I'm going to need to do. And there you have it, the finished table in its largest 4-leaf configuration. So we've had the table in this configuration with 4 leaves for about 4 or 5 months now, and I'm finally going to show you how I decrease the size of the table to its 3-leaf configuration. Having removed the 2 outer leaves, I just needed to remove the supporting beams, take away one of the central leaves, and then bring back the 2 outer leaves. Screwing the leaves tightly together once more with the zip bolts. And then finally I fixed in place 2 removable wedges to stop the table from moving laterally across the frame. And there it is, the table with just 3 leaves, which can still happily seat 6 people. So I really hope you found today's video useful, and even if you haven't got to extend your own kitchen table, I hope that you'll be able to use some of the techniques and processes that I've used in this video for some of your own projects. As usual, let me know what you've been getting up to in the comment section below. It's always great to hear from you. Please click on the like button below, and if you're new to my channel, I'd love to have you subscribe. You can do that by clicking on the link here.